for our one guest that's here this morning.
Good morning. Please welcome Jamie Norfeld.
Morning, Jamie.
Stand, Jamie.
Welcome, Jamie. We look forward to your presentation. Jamie is actually, this is her second time here at the club within the last year, maybe year and a half. So maybe she'll become more of a regular here. But welcome, Jamie. We're glad to have you. We look forward to your presentation. And you want to do our 50-50 drill? Go ahead. You want?
Two, 227-253.
5-3.
All right. Todd Pearl. Looks like Todd Pearl. Todd Pearl in the back. Congratulations, Todd. There's a good bit of commotion. Do we have any happy dollars this morning? Tim.
A couple happy dollars for the crew that volunteered at the Daily Bread. We see Jim Norton was there, Sandy, Jeff, me. Is that it? Yeah, the four of us. If you want to see a really good looking picture of us, just check our website. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to those that took time out on New Year's Eve to help serve lunch at our Daily Bread. I did see the picture and it's a good looking crew. So thank you. Anybody else? Any other happy dollars? Todd.
Good morning, guys. I've got 5 happy dollars here. We've got a full slate of students next week, so come with lots of questions. It should be a fun time.
Thanks, Todd. So just for everybody's information, we will have 3 different schools here next week. So it'll be York Suburban, York County School of Technology, and York Catholic. And we'll have our junior and senior students all making presentations. So it should be enlightening, and we'll all feel like, what in the world were we doing when we were there? Because we're so impressed by all the work that they do. So, Jim.
Good morning. I have 10 happy dollars as of last Friday. I am retired.
He's only a kid. It must be. Anyone else? Any other happy dollars? Oh, here we go. Bill. Yeah, anyway. How much money do you have?
Bucks.
Okay.
$10 worth.
You can get 10 minutes.
Oh, wow. So, our Daily Bread, great experience. I did it either the year before, winter time, end of the session. This guy standing outside the door, and he says, "Do you have any gloves in there? I am freezing." So I go back in, and apparently there's a box of discarded gloves, and grab these ratty gloves, take them out. I've got some very nice gloves on my hands. And I said, "Hey, how's this?" And he said, "Well, I'd rather have those," which were the ones on my hands. Well, what am I going to do for it? So here, you go ahead, pal, you take them, good luck. But that was quite an experience. So I'm curious, because it was pretty darn cold when you guys were working this last week. How did it go? I mean, I can see people wanting to stay there and not leave and that kind of thing. Yeah, they do what they're told, that's for sure. The guy that runs the program, there's no messing around, that's for sure. There you go.
Thanks, Bill. Do you have any gloves this morning? It's cold out.
You do not fit the need.
Yeah, okay, all right. Anybody else? Any other happy dollars? Okay, on to announcements. For those of you that may not really or we didn't get an email ahead of time, but tomorrow is our board meeting. So, we will be meeting at the York Area United Fire Company, 7:30 tomorrow morning, and that will be our regular board meeting. So, information will be coming out, and agenda will come out this afternoon. And, for any committee chairs that have reports, if you can submit them to Wendy, we may get them ahead of time. We may end up just reviewing them tomorrow, but we do have a board meeting tomorrow. It's the second Wednesday, and we want to kind of follow suit with that. The other announcement that I want to make, and this might seem like it's coming rather early, but our golf outing is going to be coming up, and we're going to be changing the date to June. So it's going to be on June the 17th. We are going to have it here at Heritage Hills. And the main reason that we're pushing this ahead of where it's been in the past is because Pints for Polio takes place in October. And with having a golf outing in September and then Pints for Polio immediately after, it felt like there was just too much stuff going on all at one time. Diana, who I think is out there on Zoom, and couldn't be here in person this morning, is going to be chairing our golf committee. If there is anyone that has an interest in serving on that committee, you can let myself or Diana know. And we're going to start to get things organized here in the near future. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there that our golf outing is going to be a lot earlier this year. And again, we're going to have it on June 17th. Any questions on that? Okay. Anybody else with any other announcements? No? I will make one more. Or Jim, do you want to? Okay. Yeah, so I need to confirm the dates. Coming up in March, we are going to, I volunteered our club, along with some other clubs to help with junior achievement and their BizTown program. I want to say the date's March 4th. But I will double check that and I will get that out to everybody. Go ahead, Tim.
You normally have to have child line clearance. Do you have to have it for that day?
No, I do not think that that's an issue at all. And at least it was not brought up to me. And this was brought up to me back in the fall of last year. So I think we're okay with not having background clearances. I'll get some information out. Thank you, Jim. I kind of forgot about that. Something tells me it's early March, but it could be late February. At any rate, I know a number of you have helped out with BizTown, and you know it's a great program. I know we're going to get a number of people that are going to volunteer to do it just because of the experience that you get with working with those kids. So I'll get that information out and share that with everybody. The other announcement I was going to make, and I think most of the people are here, but our Safety Town Committee is going to be meeting immediately after this meeting this morning to just talk about our Safety Town program that'll be coming up again in June and July of this year. So things are now that we've turned the calendar year, it seems like everything's off to a new start and things are going to be coming up on us quickly. But we will have a Safety Town Committee meeting after this meeting. Anyone else? Any other announcements? Very good. If not, I'm going to ask if Mr. Girash will come back up to introduce our speaker this morning.
I'll take 2 minutes to mention our programs coming up. If anybody who's here and paying attention knows we need some help with that committee. And some is short-term help, meaning February is open. And so at this point, if anybody has any suggestions, not even you've got to arrange the program, just send them. Well, probably easiest to Wendy, and she'll then send them out to the people on the committee. And somebody will reach out then to the person that you're suggesting we contact. And if you want to go even further and reach out, that'll be fine. And if you contact us, we'll be sure that you know what the open dates are in February. As of now, they're all open as far as we know. So that's that situation. In the meantime, we have an excellent program today. Jamie Norville taught high school history for 10 years at Milton Hershey School. and has now become director of the York County Safety Collab, which is a collaboration among 17 police departments, the DA's office, sheriff's office. She spoke to us about this probably just about a year ago, and it sounds like a great way to get these law enforcement agencies working together. She has a master's and a doctorate in American Studies, uses her local history to write a website, which she co-runs with Jim McClure. So that alone is an impressive operation. And I know she's written many articles in the Sunday paper, particularly for those who still get a Sunday paper and read the paper, which I do. And I always like that, Jamie. So today she's going to talk to us about an initiative involving the Lebanon Cemetery, which we've heard about as well here through Samantha Dorn. So without further ado, Jamie Norpel.
Thank you. It wasn't working. Oh, now it's working. All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Like I said, I'm Jamie Norpel. This presentation is actually different from Lebanon, but it's only a quarter mile right down the road. So it's a cemetery that's very, very close. Oh, yeah, no thanks. So I'm going to start with three things today over the half an hour that I have with you. First is understanding how to read gravestones, then get into a brief history of York City Cemetery, why I'm here today, and then get into a project that we started called Project Penny Heaven. So to start, I want you to think about who has the right to a written death. Does everyone have a right to a written death? Because when you look historically, ethnicity, gender, and class all changed if someone was going to have a tombstone or not. So today I'm going to talk a lot about people who did not have a tombstone. So how many of you like walking through cemeteries? No, well, okay, good. All right, good. I was like, am I the only one? All right, a few. Because frankly, they're beautiful. If you've been through Prospect Hill Cemetery, has anyone done the tour that they have through there? No, I highly recommend it. It's very good. But when you walk through Prospect Hill, you can see the beautiful mausoleums. You can read the headstones, and there's really a lot of variety when you look at them. But this also, though, denotes a lot of class. I mean, and look at the high levels of class, I should say. Look at the ornate tombstones. I mean, you look out over the few acres that they have, it's just covered with lots of different headstones. Now, if I were to go down to Wilson Cemetery down in, this is Pine Grove Furnace, I'm sorry, Cadorah State Park area. I found these two tombstones, and it's a way for us to look at them to better understand the values of the time period. So for example, this is Clara and Jacob Hess, and they were buried side by side. And you can denote a lot of equalities between husband and wife. Look at the size of the tombstone, the direction. So for the 1800s, this is pretty amazing that a woman was viewed, as equal to a man. This was before women had the right to vote. Now, the reason why they're situated that way with a woman on the left and a man on the right, is anyone think back to an important day in your past where the woman stood on the left and the man stood on the right? What was that? Yeah, your wedding day. And so that's why they were situated like that. So it's intentional. These tombstones are placed like that with a reason. It was not just haphazardly placed. But there's also some inequalities between the tombstones as well. I know it's difficult to read, but if I were to zoom up on it, you'll see that it says Clara, his wife, no last name, and then his has his last name. So again, this was 150 years ago. This was, again, before women had the right to vote, and women were viewed as important based off of their relationship to men. They were the mother of, they were married to the daughter of, and if his tombstone were to disappear, we would have no idea what her last name is. Gravestones are also an art form. This is in that same cemetery in Wilderson down in Cadorah. This is hand chiseled. This is by Slate, 1806. An artist took time to slowly chisel away all of the writing, including the date at the top. And if you notice, it says DOD, right? Date of death, 1809. This area is known for our German folklore. So if you look a lot of tombstones that were dating back to the 17 and 1800s, you see a lot of iconography. So here are some roses. Can you think of other images that come to mind when you think of German folklore? Well, once I tell you, you won't be surprised. Hearts, angels, stars, rosettes, tulips, birds. Where do you see this in German folklore? Proctor, right? So Proctor. So this is Pennsylvania Dutch. This is an art tradition. You see these with baptisms, with marriage certificates. And again, you see a lot of the flowers, the heart, the birds. You see this sometimes in hex signs on barns from Pennsylvania Dutch. So again, they put this on their tombstones as well. There's also values denoted on tombstones. So here there's a lot of stars. If you look at the date, it's 1793. Why were we feeling patriotic in 1793? What had just happened that same or 2 decades before, right? We have the Revolutionary War, the foundation of our country. And so on our tombstones, we're going to put stars. There's also this really neat fold that they have through there. And that is more, in my mind, a little bit more material culture of, it invites people to touch it. Maybe it was symbolic of a hole that was left in their hearts from someone passing. It's also this idea of eternity, no beginning and no end. So I know I'm getting kind of touchy-feely here with the tombstones and talking about all the symbolism, but really there's a lot to unearth when you look at tombstones. This one also struck my attention. So this was slate, and this was before we had spell check. There's actually a spelling error on it. It should say Erut, and it's spelled with an A, and that is German for here rest. So this, again, we can surmise that this is someone who probably could afford to hire someone who had a lot of experience, maybe someone that was just starting out, because again, you see spelling errors on tombstones. So now let me dive into what I'm here to talk to you today about, and that's City Cemetery. So here's Prospect Hill. This image is from 1925. We are looking at the northbound. So there's, if you're familiar with Prospect here, here's the mausoleum. This is all now built out today, but you can see primarily it was down closer to the city and then up moving north as you go. I'm going to talk about this little plot of land right over here. There is a fence that divides Prospect Hill from the city cemetery. It is not owned by Prospect Hill. And if you try to access a city cemetery by going to Prospect Hill, you're going to have to jump a fence, right? So it's entirely separate. It's only about 11 minutes from where we are now. How many of you ever heard of a Potter's Field? A couple of you. How about York's Potter's Field? Have you heard of this? And so we're right here down in Heritage Hills. You take 83, get off 30, go right down George Street, and it's right there. And we have a Potter's Field. So my kind of goal today is to bring awareness that we have had a lot of class divide in York County history. And so also you understand that this field exists. So if you want to visit it, I showed you if you go down George Street, right here's District High. So if you turn down 7th Alley or 7th Avenue, right here, Schley Alley, you can park right here at Schley Alley. I will say though, make sure you don't park on the grass right here. It was the first and only time I had the cops called on me. I was parking doing some work, and one of these houses over here called the cops, and this is northern jurisdiction. And a guy pulled over and he said, I got a call that someone was driving all over the graves. I was like, no, I was not driving all over the graves. I'm here doing work. I'm a historian. He still made me move. And on one hand, it ticked me off, right? I'm like, I'm just trying to do work. But at the end of the day, it meant that someone was watching over this and was protecting it and was thinking about the people buried there. So I'm glad that there's someone looking. Here's the cemetery though. You wouldn't even know this is a cemetery. Juxtapose this with the pictures of Prospect Hill that I showed you. There are over 800 people buried here. 800 people. The reason why it's called a Potter's Field dates back to biblical times. So when you read the Bible, you learn that Judas wanted to give 30 silver pieces to the priests to redeem himself from betraying Jesus. They looked at that as blood money, and so instead they used those 30 silver pieces to buy a plot of land to bury those who otherwise couldn't afford a burial. And it happened to be where all the potters exhumed their clay. So today that still carries through. We call it Potter's Field because that was the first place that people were buried. Pottersfield is not unique to York County. It's across the entire country, and in fact, the entire world. Pottersfield, people who were buried there were people who are non-Christians, unwed mothers, kind of like the outcasts, right? People who weren't baptized, babies, people who are considered morally loose or criminals. So when you think of Pottersfield, these are the type of demographics that were buried there. Again, I ask you then, who has the right to a written death? Because historically, we've decided that these people did not, that they were dumped in the ground with no headstone and no way to remember them. So they have historically not been accessed to written death. So originally, the first Pottersfield wasn't in the area that I showed you. The original location was down in York City proper. So this is St. Patrick's, this is Beaver, this is Cherry. And so over here would be Penn Park, right, to kind of orient you. So this playground, which is today a parking lot that then St. Patrick's used, or even the school uses sometimes, this was the original city cemetery. So what happened is when someone died and they had no financial means or no family to claim them, the city would then take responsibility for them. The city physician would coordinate the paperwork. The engineer would go out and locate the site, and then the city works crew would go in and dig the hole and bury the people. So I thought it would be kind of fun to tell you some of the stories of the people that were buried then in this original Pottersfield. First are some mutineers. So I'm not sure if you knew this, but Penn Park used to be a location of Revolutionary War camp during the Revolutionary War. And so General Anthony Wayne, when he was here, he heard of a bunch of York Countyans who were disgruntled with how much they were getting paid. They said that it was ideal money and not real money, and he court-martialed them. So they were shot and they were thrown in Pottersfield. And this is one of the earliest stories that we have of people buried there. We also have this really interesting story of when P.T. Barnum came to York County. They set up the circus over in Penn Park. And one of his attractions were the Fiji cannibals. So here's a picture of them over on the right. They were described as the strange and brainless beings said to have been captured somewhere in Central Africa. They were from Georgia. So P.T. Barnum was a very good salesman, but these guys pretended to be cannibals. And so during the day, they would perform over at Penn Park, but during the night, they would stay at the Pennsylvania House, which is today the Judicial Center. So when you go to the Judicial Center, that actually used to be a hotel. Well, while they were here, the Fiji cannibal dies. There was actually another news article that I didn't include that said basically that the Fiji cannibal died because he had to survive on Susquehanna shad and died from malnutrition because they don't know how to eat here in York County. But a newspaper, after they discovered that he died, a newspaper reported that when the body was discovered, the two male associates were biting and gnawing at the fleshy parts of the body with all the eagerness of their native cannibalism. Not true. It turns out that P.T. Barnum paid the newspapers to print that. He really dehumanized people. I don't know if you've seen The Greatest Showman. That does not properly display what P.T. Barnum was like as a person. He was willing to demoralize people. And so here, this man died, and guess where they put him? They put him in Pottersfield. So he was buried there with all of his native garb, rings upon his fingers, ears, and nose, bracelets around his wrists. So remember that because the Fiji cannibal is going to come up later. So in 1897, again, just to orient yourself, here's Penn Park, here's William Penn, here's St. Patrick's. Notice that now there's a school there. So in 1897, they were thinking about building a school over the former Pottersfield. And they wanted to decide if they were going to move the bodies or not. Because if you look back at the health records of 1890s, there were a lot of diseases. There was smallpox, diphtheria, typhoid, scarlet fever. And this is also before germ theory. So today, you know now how germs are spread. We have science, you know, if you wash your hands, we wear masks, social distancing. Back then, they didn't understand how germs were spread. And so they wondered if we were to build this school on top of Pottersfield without moving the bodies, would the diseases wick up through the floor? Now, we know that can't happen, but it was a legitimate concern at the time. And so they were deciding, do we move the graves, which is also going to be a lot of work and talk about dangerous with the diseases that people died from, or do you build on top of the school? And like I said, the smallpox threat was real. They were worried that if they didn't move the bodies, that then bodies would eventually become disinterred and they would discover them. And again, diseases would spread. They ultimately decided to exhume them. And at this time, there were 600 people buried in the original Potter's Field. This picture is not of York. This picture is of Gettysburg, but is the only known exhumation photograph that there is from this area. So I thought I would kind of show it to you to give you an idea. You can see that the hooks that they had to pull out the bodies, and it was a really messy and grueling process. So they had planted trees in this plot, so the tree roots had grown around the bodies that then they had to figure out how to untangle. It took 75 to 100 workers over the course of a few days to unearth these 600 bodies. It also was in April, so there was a lot of rain, heavy downpours. It was described in the newspapers as a sea of mud. There were also primarily African Americans that were buried there because this was a time of segregation. We know of Lebanon Cemetery, but outside of that, there really wasn't a place for Blacks in York City. And so Potter's Field was the place that they went. Some were well preserved, but many were just wrapped in blankets. That's it. Very few had coffins. There were some coffins, but very few. Yeah. Sometimes they did find 3 to 5 bodies on top of one another. The Fiji cannibal was unearthed during this time. And the first day that they started digging was April 8th. And they decided that they weren't going to completely disinter him. They were going to wait until April 9th, the next day when they removed everyone. And what they found is when they went in for the next day, his body mysteriously went missing. And legend says that here in York County, there was a doctor who stole his body, boiled down his bones, assembled the skeleton, and hung them in his office. Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if this still exists or not. The rings and the bracelets were also missing. So yay, York County. Some doctor probably did that in our past. So when the bodies were moved, this is then the cemetery. This is a different shot from what I showed you before. The other one was from the apartment building, but this is it. I mean, the 600 people who originally moved, this is where they were buried. This is known as the Index of Graves. It's the only documentation that's out there before we did all our work with Project Penny Heaven. But to orient you, here is Prospect Hill. Over here would be Schley Alley. Up here is the apartment building. And so we're looking kind of northbound. Right here, there's a sign that says double row of graves. This is where the 600 people were dumped, just on double row of graves. So when you look at the 1800s, we're going to see the commodification of the funeral process. I mean, if you've buried someone lately, how much does a funeral run you? 10,000 minimum. When you look at caskets and the embalming process and the clothing and just the entire process, it's very, very expensive. So this started in the 1800s when we see a lot of upward mobility in America. And so can you imagine there was an increase in use of Potter's Fields, because there are a lot of people who could not afford that. We also see changes of poverty, feelings towards poverty change. So today we know there's 3 reasons for poverty. One is individual explanations, like personal choices that people make. There's also 2 structural challenges. We know that there are a lot of things in our society that make it difficult for people to move up their socioeconomic status. And then we also think of fatalistic explanations. These are things that are out of control, bad luck. If you're a Calvinist, right, or religious, this is where this might play in. But back in the 1800s, it was just individual. If someone was poor, it was their fault. They didn't pull themselves up with their bootstraps. There was no more holistic picture that might explain poverty. So you can see then the mindset was, it's your fault. You deserve to be buried in Potter's Field. Another story is of Charles Granger. He was more commonly known in York County as Squire Braxton. So Squire Braxton was born into slavery. He was born in Virginia in 1827. He moved up here when he was about 43 years old. He came up across the Mason-Dixon line on a Conestoga wagon with about 40 other people. He settled down there then in Penn Park. So Penn Park was where he lived. He basically squatted. He built a hut that was made of just tin and cardboard. He had a lot of dogs and cats The neighborhood kids would come and take rocks and throw it at his hut, making all the dogs bark. And he was known for sticking rifles outside holes in his walls and saying, "You damn kids, get out of here," you know? For a living, it was actually kind of gross. For a living, you guys are finished eating, right? Yeah. So he would take horses and cows that had died that were used for farming, because York County has a strong agricultural background, and he would skin them and he would use the hide, take them to tanneries because it's very valuable, those hides. What did he do with the carcasses? He threw them in a ditch in Penn Park. So it's kind of gross and smelly. He didn't have a great reputation for that because Penn Park really wasn't very accommodating for its original purpose. He also was known to clean out privies. When the Civil War happened and we had people settled in Penn Park again, he would go around and basically collect trash. And so he really made a living off of other people's scraps. Well, he died in 1881. The last 2 years of his life were spent in the almshouse. And what's amazing about Squire Braxton is that nearly 500 people came to his funeral. 500 people. But again, no one paid for a burial plot. They just put him in Potter's Field. So now moving into the last part of my presentation here. So far, I've walked you through how you can read cemeteries and how they denote a lot of value and meaning. I talk about the city cemetery and kind of the background and the history. But now I'm going to get into a do-it-yourself urbanism project that we've done to try to bring light to this, to Penny's heaven. So the reason why you might be thinking, like, why did I get involved with this? I was a high school history teacher, so of course I love history, but ultimately it was because I lived in this apartment very briefly. In 2020, I moved out and I moved into this brand new apartment building. And one day, so looking out of my kitchen window over here, I could see Prospect Hill. But looking out of my bedroom window, I saw this lot. I saw kids playing football, people walking their dogs. I had no idea that it was a city cemetery. And so I went for a walk one day. I saw one stone, which I'll show you a picture in a minute. I did some research. Of course, Jim McClure had already written, a dozen articles on it. He's my mentor. He's fabulous. So I talked to him about it. I ended up writing a few articles myself. I went and presented at the Pennsylvania chapter for the American Association of Gravestone Studies. And while I was there presenting on Penny Heaven, Mayor Helfrich was there. And he said, "Jamie, I'm the mayor of York, and I didn't even know we had a Potter's Field. Because while it's in North York, it's owned by York City. York City owns it. York City is responsible for maintaining it, for mowing it, but it's in North York Borough." And so there should really be a monument there. So then I spent the next few months researching, designing the monument I thought would go. I had a meeting with him, was really excited, laid out my plan, and he said, "This is awesome. Good luck fundraising." I was like, okay. So that's what kind of motivated me to kind of start this project. So then after that, I said, all right, I have to take this seriously. So I formed a committee. I then had to find a fiscal agent, because if anyone in here is interested in raising money for a project yourself, you know that you should never accept donations in your own name. So finding a fiscal sponsor was rather difficult, but I did find one through Preservation PA. It's a great nonprofit that preserves cemeteries. I found the monument, the fundraising. It's so funny because it's one line and one word up here, but if you've ever fundraised, it took so much work to just get the story out there and meet with people and write grants. But we were successful. And then over that time of fundraising, the committee and I did a lot of finding and searching. And what we found is, this is just a screenshot of those 600 people that were moved in 1897. A lot of the names are lost. They're in newspapers.com, but generally we don't know much about them. After that, though, I showed you that index of graves. That's in 1930. Now we have a lot more names. And so thanks to newspapers.com and Find a Grave, we were able to, 270 names we were able to identify. We also worked with a Kutztown professor who did some ground penetrating radar. This is a really neat machine. It's only about a foot, square foot, 12 inches by 12 inches. And the cemetery is 180 feet by 180 feet. You can only do 1 foot at a time. So her, along with a bunch of Kutztown students, literally went up and down the cemetery one day. And what it does is it looks for anomalies in the ground. So it can't show you what's in the ground. It can only show you changes in the ground. If my video works, I wanted to show you. Oops. Can you hit play by chance, Hunter? So here is the Kutztown professor showing her students how this works, because also it's not just used for cemeteries. If anyone here works construction, you also could use this for construction purposes because you need to know what's buried under the ground. But they mapped out these lines every foot, and it was a painstakingly foot by foot throughout the entire 1 acre plot. Thank you. So here's what they found. You can kind of see the graves. Look at the index of graves. But also, do you remember the double row of graves? There's no conclusive evidence that someone's buried there. So again, unless someone just started digging or historians did research, there's no way that we would have known. So the 600 people originally buried, and then I predict at least another 200 people were buried after that. They're primarily up in the northwest quadrant of this, and then over here on the right. And then the one marker that I'm going to go over here in a second is right down here on the right. So here is that one marker that I showed you. And this came out in 1995. A bunch of college students learned about Potter's Field. They raised money to put this one tombstone in. And then this was it. This is the only tombstone in City Cemetery. And it brought attention to one baby named Clashay Johnson. So Clashay Johnson, so up to this point, I've told you a lot about history, right? Well, the last known burial was 2004. So this really isn't, it's a historical site, but it's also more commonly used. And right now I'm working with Coroner Gay because there's a lot of bodies that still go unclaimed. Not last year, but the year before, 2023, there were 36 people that went unclaimed in York County. And instead of burying them in Potter's Field, now what they do is they cremate them, and there are funeral homes that have agreed to keep the ashes. But we're working on trying to raise money to try to bury those ashes. But Clashay Johnson's story is very sad. He died in 1987. Here you can see they even wrote his name wrong, spelled his name wrong when they wrote his name down. So he was born to a teenage mother, and she was running a bath. The bath was too hot. She placed him in the tub of scalding water. Something distracted her. The baby remained in the tub of scalding water. He ended up having to be sent to Johns Hopkins, where he survived for another 2 months. But he ended up dying from liver, heart, organ failure, right? But it took months. Johns Hopkins then did do an autopsy, and they sent back the body. This is like dark stuff, so sorry guys. I wish there was something more positive for your Tuesday morning. They ended up sending the body back. It was described to me as being filleted open, right, after the surgery. The family had no money, and so they went to the dollar store and got a foam cooler. And they put the body in a foam cooler, glued it and duct taped it shut, and he went in Potter's Field. This is in 1987. This is, again, not that long ago. Yep. So what's unique then, when you look at all these names of these people buried here, it's not an exception. A lot of people's stories are just like that. And when I calculated the known identities, 41% were Black. And again, this is before desegregation in the 1960s. If you look at the composition, the racial composition of the people buried here, there are Black and white babies buried in the exact same plot. So what class really what class cut up, race cut through, because it shows you, so there have been people who disagree with me calling this an integrated cemetery. It was integrated, but I've been criticized because the word integration denotes a level of bringing people together intentionally. That wasn't really the case, right? It was just where everyone was just kind of dumped. So thankfully, there are people who are drawing attention to this. So I reached out to some alum of York College. I reached out to a professor. She has a museum studies class. And so these students researched Penny Heaven. I gave them all of the known documentation that I had, and they created this beautiful exhibit that was on display at the Center for Community Engagement to try to bring attention to it. We also then, that helped us to try to raise money. Our goal was $20,000. Again, my committee, we worked very hard to try to put together the $20,000 for this, but it was expensive, and we finally did it. So we raised enough money that just last year in March, we were able to install the monument and unveil it, as Coroner Gay helped me reveal it. And here are all the known names. And I'll tell you, the research is largely exhausted. I have a feeling we might uncover a couple names here and there over the years. There is some space down here at the bottom that we can tack nameplates if we need. But now when you drive past the cemetery, you'll be able to see the monument and at least recognize that people, are buried there. So just to finish here, I want to again show you what's right next door here's Prospect Hill. This is a place where there's individualism, community also, and honor. And compare that to, again, Potter's Field, where there was no monument. So the reason why this place matters is because it's a site of consciousness for us to reflect, to have open dialogue, to talk about how gender, race, and class decided who had a written death, and also the unity for ways that we can come together. Because City Cemetery had a lot of unintended messages. This is a place that we permanently marginalized people, the poor on the outskirts of society, forgotten and lost in a lot of cases. But now today, this memorial sends a new message that we recognize people and they deserve to have a written death. So if you want to learn more, I, for my day job, work within public safety, but one of my passion projects is I do a lot of local history stuff. So I have a monthly podcast called Hometown History. My co-host Dami and I did an episode on Penny Heaven. And then, like I said, Jim McClure and I run a website called Witnessing York, and there's a whole tab just dedicated to Penny Heaven. So thank you so much for your time, and I'd love to answer any questions. Yeah, Diane. So when I was going through the research, there was someone that said the only people who can afford to be buried there are people who have pennies. So I thought, oh, Penny Heaven and Project Penny Heaven. Yeah. So the mayor requested that I have a $5,000 maintenance fund for vandalism or spray paint just to help maintain it. So we're still fundraising and also landscaping. I would love to have more flowers there. I'm working with have you had Annalisa Bush-Merrick come and speak to you? She does a lot of some gardens, free gardens around. And so her, as well as Pheasant Run Greenhouse, helped me with planting to just make it look pretty, so then people want to come here. Because again, if you ever visit, you'll see the comparison to Prospect Hill. Yeah, it's also though kind of sketchy because if you go digging in the dirt, there's a lot of articles. You're supposed to bury. Have you heard 6 feet deep? Or the idea is you dig a hole 6 foot, and then by the time you have the casket or the body, it's about 2 feet. It's really only 4 feet underground. But there were a lot of articles. I have an hour-long presentation of this I had cut. But there are a lot of articles of people who are not buried the whole way down. And so there is some concern that if we were to plant a bush, for example, we don't know. It's only a foot deep, so we have to be cautious. These are also people's loved ones. I originally did an article called How We Bury the Loved and the Unloved. And I had someone reach out to me and say, my grandpa's buried there. It's not that we didn't love him. We just didn't have money. I thought, wow, he's right. I'm talking about people's loved ones who still remember them. And so I have to be a little bit more respectful in the way that I describe them.
So you said before it got moved that there were stories of people 3 or 4 or 5 deep, but there was an engineer involved as far as where to actually bury them. Is that the case where either they ran out of space, or I'm just trying to figure out how did you end up in a situation where somebody go in and be digging in the same spot like 3 or 4 times to get bodies? Yeah,
so there's no evidence to give you a solid answer, but we can hypothesize. We know that not all engineers are cut from the same clay, so maybe there was a little bit of ignorance. I also know that this again was a cemetery that was not. It was not. People weren't concerned. People didn't care. So I think it was more a matter of dig the hole and get him in the ground. This is also, they had I have not found any chart that showed where people were actually buried. So I think it was more of a haphazard to go figure out where you're going to bury the person, and that's it. Yeah.
Really, this idea of poverty home about 10 years ago as a banker, I looked at a building project down in Baltimore. It was on the south side. And when we went down there, met with the builder, there was a huge field next to where his project was going to be built. And inner city, very poor folks literally would bring their loved ones out there and bury them themselves in this field. And there were all these shallow graves, with the mounds and whatnot. It was pretty, I didn't know how to describe it, but it wasn't like an acre. It was probably 20, 30 acres.
Wow.
We were told they would come out in the middle of the night, bring their loved one out and bury them out there.
So what did you do then? Did you?
Well, this was an adjacent property, so it's still, I'm assuming it's still there.
Well, and that, so we saw this also with the city cemetery. The reason why the index of graves even exists is because before 1930, there was a woman who lost her baby. There was a lot of cases of malnutrition. A lot of babies died from malnutrition. And she buried her daughter, and she saved money to exhume the daughter to then bury the infant in a church cemetery. But when they went to dig up where they thought she was buried, because they just again did it haphazardly, they found a grown man's skeleton. And so they tried another location where they known babies were buried, and it was again an adult. And so that mother was never able to exhume her daughter, but she never got her. So she's still buried there, and we don't know where. Yeah, so this is also similar to that. Well, I hope you guys have a great Tuesday. Sad.
Let's give Jeannie a round of applause. Honestly, even though it is maybe a little sad to hear this, I think it's important to hear it. And I had no clue. So it's very interesting to hear this information. I had explained to Jamie that she can probably take this book and put it into Logos Academy, since that's where she's working. But we'll donate a book to Logos Academy in honor of your presentation. So thank you very much, Tim. I'm going to want to get a picture of our website.
Okay, great, thanks.
Once again, another round of applause for Jamie. With that, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I know this morning probably wasn't the best of weather conditions, and somebody did ask what our protocol is as far as having a meeting or canceling a meeting. And what we'll do, in the past, we went off of a school schedule. We found though that sometimes schools can be quick to pull the plug on having school, which makes sense for the safety of kids and everything else. But what we'll do is the day before, on a Monday by noon, we'll make the call as far as whether we're going to have a meeting or not. So in the future, with any kind of weather events or anything else, by noon on Monday, you should know whether we're going to have a meeting or not. And we'll send an email out just to let everybody know. So just so you're aware of that in the future. Thank you, though, for coming out, and we will see you next week, weather permitting. And for those that are able to stick around for Safety Town Committee, we will be having that here shortly. So have a great week, and we'll see you tomorrow at the board meeting for any board members.
Thank you.